The American flag was not flying above a parade ground. It was nailed to a rough post beside a prisoner cage in Western Germany in the last hard weeks of the war, and the Waffen SS officer who walked toward it knew exactly what he was doing. He did not run. He did not shout. He stepped through the mud, looked at the American soldiers around him, and ground his cigarette ash against the cloth. For 1 second, every rifleman near the gate forgot he was tired. Then General George S. Patton saw it, and Patton did not do what the men expected. He did not strike the prisoner. He did not let the guards drag him into the mud. He did something colder. He made the man disappear into paperwork. March 1945 had turned Western Germany into a country of broken stone, flooded roads, and exhausted armies. The Third United States Army had come out of France, through Luxembourg, through the Ardennes, and into the German borderlands with the kind of speed that made maps look out of date before the ink dried. The men under Patton were not fresh troops anymore. They had crossed fields where frozen bodies were still under the snow. They had heard German artillery in the dark so often that they could judge distance by the sound of the burst. They had watched friends vanish in the bocage, in the Ardennes, along roads where a truck could burn for hours before anyone had time to pull it aside. So by the time they reached the Saar-Palatinate line, they were no longer learning war. They were carrying it. Patton understood that. Better than most commanders, he understood what a year of combat did to young men. He understood how quickly anger could turn into something permanent. He also understood that his army was moving too fast to afford disorder. That is why he spent so much time near the front, not because an army commander had to stand beside every roadblock, because his presence changed behavior. A jeep would come in without much warning. A polished helmet, riding crop, pistols, 4 stars, a face every man in Third Army recognized before the jeep stopped rolling. And suddenly the whole area stiffened, not out of comfort, out of standard. The prisoner cage that day was temporary, like almost everything in Patton's war. Wire, posts, mud, a few guards, a few clerks with forms, a line of German prisoners waiting to be counted, searched, and sent farther west. Most of the prisoners did what defeated soldiers usually do. They stood quietly. Some stared at the ground. Some tried to look proud and failed. A few were relieved so completely that they seemed embarrassed by it, as if survival itself had become an admission. But the Waffen SS men were different often enough that every American in the cage noticed them. Not all of them were the hardened political soldiers of the early war. By 1945, the SS had absorbed conscripts, replacements, half-trained boys, and men who had no illusions left. But among its officers there were still those who carried themselves like defeat was only a personal inconvenience. They had been taught that they belonged to a higher order. They had been told that history itself was on their side. Now history had put them behind wire. Some men surrender. Other men keep looking for a stage. The SS officer near the gate was one of the second kind. He was young enough to still want witnesses, and old enough to know the meaning of the symbol in front of him. His uniform was dirty but carefully held. His collar tab still mattered to him. His posture was deliberate. He saw the small American flag fixed to the post near the processing table. It was not ceremonial. It was not large. It was a practical marker in a war full of confusion. It told incoming troops, prisoners, drivers, and patrols that this was an American-controlled point. In a moving front, a flag was not decoration. It was authority. The officer stepped close to it. One guard called out. The prisoner looked at him, then at the flag. He smeared ash on the lower stripes. Then he straightened and waited for the explosion. The explosion almost came. A sergeant moved first. Another soldier cursed. One of the younger guards lifted his rifle as if the butt of it had become the only language worth using. These men had earned their anger. They had seen German towns deny what was outside their roads. They had seen prisoners who still believed arrogance could survive surrender. They had seen enough dead Americans to know the flag was not a piece of cloth to them. It was the thing on the coffins, the thing sewn to shoulders, the thing painted on vehicles that drove through artillery and did not always come back. So when the SS officer insulted it, he was not insulting an idea. He was reaching into every grave those men carried in memory. And then Patton stepped forward. No drama, no roar, no performance. That may be the first thing most people get wrong about men like Patton. They imagine the profanity first, the theatrical anger, the famous temper. Those things were real enough. But command is not temperament. Command is what remains when temperament would be easiest. Patton stopped close to the prisoner, close enough that the man could not pretend he was unseen. The general looked at the ash on the flag. Then he looked at the SS officer. He ordered the clerk to write it down. Name, rank, unit if known. Time, place, witnesses, the exact act. The prisoner was to be removed from the general enclosure and held separately until the incident could be entered into the proper prisoner record. Not beaten, not humiliated for the amusement of the guards, not given the martyrdom he had come searching for. Filed. In that moment, the SS officer had expected passion. He had expected American rage, because rage would make him important again. It would prove to him that even captured, disarmed, and surrounded, he could still make the enemy lose control. Patton denied him that. The punishment began by making the act official. A defeated man had tried to turn contempt into power. Patton turned it into evidence. Then the general turned to the American soldiers. The men were still hot. They did not want a lesson. They wanted permission. Patton did not pretend their anger was dishonorable. He knew better. Men who had fought from Normandy to the German frontier did not need a lecture on restraint from someone who had not paid the cost. But he did remind them what the cost was for. The prisoner had just shown them the last possession of a collapsing system. Contempt. The armies that had marched under that ideology were falling apart. German command nets were failing. Fuel was gone. Divisions existed on paper with companies that could barely fill a street. Prisoner columns stretched for miles. The man who touched that flag was not strong. He was surrounded. The flag was still up. The army that carried it was still moving. And the correct answer was not to become smaller than the moment. The correct answer was to finish the war. That was the part Patton understood with unusual clarity. Discipline was not softness. It was not politeness. It was not mercy without memory. Discipline was control over the direction of violence. An army without discipline could still destroy things. It could still frighten civilians. It could still win a street fight. But it could not be trusted with a campaign. It could not be trusted with prisoners. It could not be trusted with victory. And in March 1945, victory was becoming more dangerous by the day. The Wehrmacht was not collapsing evenly. Some German units surrendered as soon as American armor appeared. Others fought with the bitterness of men who had nothing left but orders. Bridges were blown. Roads were mined. Towns could be empty at dawn and lethal by noon. Third Army was pushing through all of it. The Saar-Palatinate campaign was not a clean march across a map. It was mud, traffic jams, demolished crossings, fuel calculations, and German formations trying to escape east before the trap closed. Patton wanted movement because he believed speed itself saved lives. Every hour lost gave the enemy time to reorganize, blow a bridge, shift guns, or disappear behind another river line. That is why a small incident at a prisoner cage mattered. Not because it changed the campaign, because it tested the army carrying the campaign. A commander reveals himself in the decisions too small for history books. The big decisions are prepared, staffed, argued, recorded. The small ones happen before anyone can build a speech around them. A prisoner insults the flag. A guard reaches for violence. A general has half a second to decide what kind of army the men are watching. Patton chose control. The choice did not come from gentleness. Patton was not a gentleman. He believed in hard movement, hard standards, and hard consequences. He had studied war obsessively, from Caesar to Napoleon to the cavalry charges of the American Civil War. He treated military history not as decoration, but as a manual filled with dead men explaining what not to repeat. One lesson was constant. An army that cannot control itself after victory is still in danger. It gives the enemy stories. It creates incidents. It turns surrendering men into resistors. It buries commanders in investigations when they should be moving divisions. It confuses anger with purpose. Patton had no intention of letting an SS officer steal a minute more than he had already stolen. So the prisoner was separated. The flag was cleaned or replaced. The guards were put back to work. The processing continued. That is the unsatisfying part of the story. It is also the strongest part, because the easy version would be simpler to tell. In the easy version, Patton knocks the man down. The soldiers cheer. The insult is answered in the language the prisoner seems to deserve. But that version gives the SS officer exactly what he wanted. A scene. A legend. A bruised face he could carry as proof that his contempt still mattered. The actual answer was harder. A written record, a separate cage. No loss of control. No American soldier reduced to the man's level. No victory inside defeat. That is command, not the absence of anger. The ownership of it. Within days, Patton's army would force the next great threshold of the campaign. On the night of March 22nd into March 23rd, 1945, Third Army troops crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim. The crossing was fast, aggressive, and characteristically ahead of the public drama surrounding other Allied operations. Once across, Patton called higher headquarters with the satisfaction of a man reporting not a proposal, but a fact. The Rhine had been the river Germany trusted. Patton made it a line behind him. From there, Third Army kept driving east. The map opened. German resistance fractured. Columns of prisoners grew longer. American supply officers fought to keep fuel and ammunition moving fast enough to satisfy a commander who hated the idea of slowing down when the enemy was finally breaking. But speed did not erase what they were entering. It revealed it. In April, American troops reached Ohrdruf, a concentration camp near Gotha. Patton, Bradley, and Eisenhower would see the evidence of Nazi murder with their own eyes. Men who had spent years surrounded by combat were still shaken by what they found there. Patton was shaken too. The war had already been brutal beyond language, but the camps showed something different from battlefield death. They showed system, procedure, administration. Human beings turned into records, labor, ash, and absence. After Ohrdruf, the gesture at the prisoner cage looked smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because ash on a flag was nothing beside the crimes being uncovered across Germany. Larger because it came from the same contempt, the same belief that some lives, some nations, some people, some symbols could be treated as beneath dignity. The SS officer in the cage had been disarmed, but the idea that made him step toward that flag had not yet fully died. Patton's response did not redeem the world. It did not undo what had happened in Europe. It did not turn war into something clean, but it did mark a line. Here is how an army answers contempt when it still has work to do. It records, it restrains, it remembers, it moves. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Patton did not have long after it. In December, after a road accident near Mannheim, he died from complications of his injuries and was buried in Luxembourg among the men of the Third Army. That part matters. Patton had been many things. Brilliant, difficult, theatrical, severe, often impossible. Sometimes right in ways that angered people, sometimes wrong in ways that damaged him. But he wanted to lie with the soldiers he had commanded, not above them in story, among them in earth. And somewhere in the memory of those soldiers was a small prisoner cage in Western Germany, a flag on a rough post, and a captured SS officer trying to make himself powerful for one last second. He failed, not because nobody was angry, because the anger was held, because the men watched their commander refuse the cheap answer, because the flag did not need revenge to remain a flag. The prisoner was written down. The guards returned to their posts. The army moved east. Patton gave the man no martyrdom, only a record, a guard detail, and the silence of an army still moving toward the end.